And how's it going? And welcome to No Fun Allowed. Today you are joined by a very special guest, Sly Flourish.
Hello.
How is it going, sir? What are you,
Oh, it's going well.
uh,
Yeah. Crazy times, but interesting times.
I'll tell you
So,
what,
yeah.
I can't,
Learning a
I
lot.
can't wait to tell, my future, grandkids about the atrocities that we went through.
Right. Well,
We,
there was that one year we basically lost.
there was that one year that, my life didn't change because I sit indoors all day, but, that's
Yeah.
beside the point.
Yeah.
So, Sly Flourish, you are known throughout the community as the lazy DM, but obviously you're not lazy considering how much work you're putting
I don't
out.
mind.
You are known throughout the community for doing all these awesome collaborations and all this works and stuff. You're doing an amazing job for the community, and you are helping out a ton of people. So, on behalf of everyone, I thank you for that
Well,
because
thank you. It's my passion. I try.
yep, absolutely. It's great to love the thing that you're doing, It's great to be
Oh yeah.
passionate about it. And you've been doing it for a few years now.
Yep.
So speaking of that, let's go ahead and get started in that. You're putting out all this amazing content for the role-playing community and specifically D&D. So how did you get into D&D in the first place? I'm curious.
So I actually got started with D&D back when the gold box D&D games came out for the Apple IIe, back in 80 something. And I had never played. I knew about D&D. I actually had a friend, my oldest friend, who I've known for I think 44 years now. He was playing D&D as a young teen, and I remember he had like his dad's suitcase filled with all of the BECMI boxes. And I regret to this day not playing it with him, right? Like, and I talked to him today, and he's like not into it at all now.
Oh, of course.
And he's a jazz musician now in San Francisco. It's been a jazz musician for 40 years, and jazz and classical trumpet player. So so I still talk to him about it, and I'm like, man, I kind of wish I played with back then. He's like, it would have been great because none of us knew what we were doing, right? And it's kind of the common story that nobody really knew what they were doing back then.
I think that's one of the best shared stories
like
about everyone.
right.
No one knew how to play.
No one knew how to play, and everybody's pretending. So, but I played those games and I liked them a lot. And I remember I bought the second edition Player's Handbook because I wanted to understand more of the math that was going on behind the video game I was playing. And I read it and I liked it, and I was like, I want to play this with my friends. And so I managed to scrounge a few friends together, and we played a campaign, probably I don't even know if we played a year. It's a long time ago, so it's hard to know exactly how long we played. And we were in high school playing second edition D&D and ran a campaign that was sent in Zental Keep in the Dale Lands in the Forgotten Realms. And I still think back fondly on it, like a lot of fun stuff. They fought Manchun, back when Manchun and the Zhentarim were really bad guys and not like mercenaries. And they fought Manchun, and Manchun blew them up with a fully charged Staff of the Magi broken over his knee, and all kinds of fun stuff like that. And then I stopped playing. I went to college, and I met a guy, and then met another group, and played second edition D&D for about 2 years in college. Then we all got into Magic the Gathering in a big way, and kind of stopped playing D&D. And then I graduated, and I got a job, and then I started playing third edition with my wife and a friend of hers, and a couple of other friends of ours. And that kind of, at that point, which was probably about 15 or 16 years ago, I think maybe longer than that. I think it's longer than that. I think it's not quite 20 years, but 17, 18 years, is when we started playing pretty regularly, like at least a monthly game. And then when my wife and I got married and we moved into our current house, we started a weekly game. We've had that game going on for more than 10 years now, about 11 years. And, longer than that, 16, that was 2006. So man, I can't keep track of time. 14 years, 15 years. And so I've had a regular game. We played third edition, we played fourth edition, we've been playing fifth edition, we played a whole bunch of other systems in between, and people have kind of come in and out of the group as we go. I kind of keep the group moving, but I've had some players that have been there for more than 10 years we've been playing. And so that has how I got kind of into D&D. And then it was at the beginning of fourth edition when I was really interested, like the problems I was having with third edition, I saw fourth edition tackling. It was the kind of game I wanted at the time. And I remember talking to like Rob Hainso, who was one of the developers of 4th edition, about it, back then. And I kind of grabbed him at a local convention and talked to him about it. And I was like, are you going to fix like confirmations on crits? Because that sucks. And he's like, is it fun? And I'm like, no. He goes, then we're not going to keep it. And I was like, okay, I'm on board. He's like, you hit a 20, you crit. Then, of course, they went overboard with critical hits in 4th edition, which is a whole other problem. And so I was really excited about it, and we played a lot of it. And I played a big 1st to 30th level campaign in it, and played a whole bunch of secondary campaigns in 4th edition. Played at conventions. Really threw myself into 4th edition, and then D&D Next came out, and I kind of fell in love with that too. So I've generally been pretty happy with whatever direction they go, even if those directions are radically different from one another.
Latching on to the new thing, absolutely.
Yeah, like 3rd edition to 4th edition to 5th edition are pretty big shifts in the approaches of D&D, and yet I was on board with all of them. So yeah, I started Sly Flourish up at the early days of 4th edition as a way to specifically help DMs improve running D&D games, right? And particularly running 4th edition D&D games. It was a 4th edition blog, which is why it's called Sly Flourish, is because the Rogue Power Sly Flourish was there, and I was checking domain names, and that one was free. So no magic there. Yeah, so that's how I kind of ended up here.
Absolutely. I mean, that's an amazing story to tell that spans almost the entirety of D&D's length, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, not quite. So I missed out on first.
Missed first, but you were there for the majority.
BCMI in first. I just missed out on it. Yeah.
But if you just got in the 1st edition, you wouldn't have known what to do then anyway. So what's the
right?
difference
Yeah.
there?
Right.
So you've obviously gone through this incredible journey, and it sounds like you've had an incredible group of players, like a core group, which is what every DM wants. Everyone wants to have that core group through years, because that's how you get the best games ever, right? So have you been the forever DM in that whole debacle? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Never the player?
No, not as far as core groups have. I can't. So the last time I played in 2 campaigns during 4th edition, one of which was a guy that I met, and we talked with him, and we played for, I don't know, a good while with him, probably about a year in that game, and that was a lot of fun. And then the game kind of split off, and we sort of did other things. I think he stopped the game, and then we kind of moved off. And then a friend of mine, James Grimmell, who I met at a Gen Con a long time ago, and he started a campaign, really good DM, and we played a 4th edition campaign with him that was great fun in his home world. So I have played in campaigns, but most of the time when I play at conventions doing like Adventures League and stuff like that. And that's my chance to DM, but or my chance to play. But I much prefer DMing, and I think I'm far better at a DM than I am as a player. Like I get bored easily, and I get distracted, and I don't like having 1/5 of the spotlight and all the problems that you have. I had, and so like how much should I lean into the scene? How much should I pull back from this scene? I'm not good at that. So I like it though, and I have a friend of mine is actually going to be. I have a irregular. I actually have 3 groups going on. And one of those groups is I'm handing the DM seat over to another guy who's actually the dude I've been playing with for like 15 years. And he's now picking up and he's a fantastic DM too. And so I'm looking forward to actually playing in a game that isn't a one-shot.
Absolutely. And I think there is something very special in handing off the torch to someone else. I think. Yeah,
I mean, in this case, it's not like I'm handing it to an acolyte. Like he's as smart as I am about anything that has to do with D&D. So, and he runs his own game. So it was really like, hey, would you like me to run it? I'm like, sure. Here you go.
Absolutely. I'm in the same boat where, I'm a forever DM, and then I play in a game, and I'm just like, man, I'm a fish out of water. I don't know what's going on.
I like it. Yeah, I like it. But I do. Yeah, I get picky, and I get distracted easily when there's a lot going on.
Absolutely. So yeah, you solidify the fact that you're this DM for all this time, and you're doing all these incredible things. And at one point, you sit down and decide that you shouldn't just be DMing for your little group. You should tell your experiences to the world, and then you, of course, craft this incredible device to help everybody out. What was the driving influence behind that decision?
Which thing did I craft?
Specifically, let's go ahead and say the lazy DM.
Lazy Dungeon Master, yeah. So that was also kind of a fluke. I really wish I had a nice story about like the time lightning struck on the idea of the Lazy Dungeon Master, but I think I was kind of leaning in that direction. That really happened at in my own sort of transition from 4th to 5th edition when D&D Next was out for a couple of years, and I was starting to see how the game was different when we were playing D&D Next, and I realized that like 4th edition required a ton of prep. And I realized that a lot of that prep wasn't actually the stories that we were sharing afterwards, right? It wasn't the things we were talking about. And so I listened to a lot of people, and I did a lot of surveys, and I did a lot of polls, and I talked to a lot of, expert DMs and everything like that, and producers of the game. I'd also been freelancing with Wizards of the Coast, so I could talk to them a little bit about it. And there was a common statement that, like, it's the same story. Like, oh, I build this whole thing out, and then my characters jog left, and they don't go there. Right? I spent forever building this 3-story castle with all the things, and then they went to another castle. So it's a very common metaphor that we prep a ton and then throw it away. And so, but I wanted to like dive into that idea more. And it's like, well, what's the minimum amount you can prep? I started off with like people are busy, and no one, lots of people aren't DMing as many games or any games because they don't have the time to do it. So how can we do less prep and still run a game? And then as I was digging into that topic and talking to people about it, I kept running into the same concept, which isn't that there are ways to prep less, but that sometimes prepping less results in a better game. Right. And that was sort of a profound idea. So I was trying to dig into like, why is that the case? And I don't think it's a matter of saying there's no prep, right? It's not you can't take that conclusion all the way to its finest point of like, well, then zero prep is an infinitely good game. Right. And it's like, no, you probably need something, right?
Improv the game.
Most people need something. There are people who say that they just completely improv their entire game and it runs great. And that's great. Probably not most people.
Yeah. Most people.
So it was a talk about like, what are the things that you actually need? So the original Lazy Dungeon Master laid out an idea that was very, very minimal, and a lot of people used it, and a lot of people liked it. And I used it, and I liked it, and it worked. The more I started, I kept iterating on it, and eventually I got to the point where the actual things I'm doing for prep no longer fits the things I talked about in my own book. Right. So I kept thinking like, I think I need to do a new one, but I'm like, people like it, and they're using it, and they dig it, and it sells well. So like, why would I break that? Like, am I going to, I remember having conversations with my wife. I'm like, there's an outcome here where I write a second book and everyone isn't sure about which one to buy, and no one buys either. Right. And now both books are dead. Right. And like, I will spend all this time and energy trying to make a new version of the book, and nobody wants that either. Turned out that wasn't the case. And I did a Kickstarter for Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master and got, I think like 6,000 backers. And a lot of people, turned out everybody was interested, or not everybody, but many, many people were interested in it. And I spent a lot of time. I actually took a sabbatical from my job to work on it. I did lots of polls with thousands and thousands of dungeon masters. I did lots of interviews with hundreds of dungeon masters, and really trying to narrow down like, what are the aspects that we need, and how do you prepare to improvise, and what are the steps that you can take that are kind of what's sort of the minimum outline that you can do. And I articulated it down. I knocked it down to 8 steps. Though they're not all inclusive. You can add other steps if they're handy, and you can remove steps if they're not. The whole thing is intended to be this sort of modular approach. Maybe you just like one idea, right? And a lot of people, luckily, and I'm happy for this, that a lot of people have latched onto the one idea that I have found be the most useful too, which is this concept of secrets and clues. The idea that one way to prepare to improvise is to write down 10 things the characters can discover in the next game, and keep them tweet sized, right? They're one sentence, and you don't determine where they're going to figure it out. So instead, you just have them on hand, and then when the characters do stuff, they might discover a secret. And it doesn't matter if they jog left, or if they jog right, or if they talk to an NPC, or they get a magic sword. They can learn one of the secrets by any of the vehicles where they would normally learn something. And that concept came from a couple places. One is that idea of like, what is exploration? If we have these 3 pillars of D&D, we know what combat looks like, and we know what NPC interaction looks like, but what does exploration look like? And I realized there isn't that same level of granularity that they have for the other 2 with exploration. It's like, well, it's kind of rolling skill checks, and it's kind of doing maps, and it's kind of, there's a lot of other things. But I was like, well, how do you articulate the same way that we have the other ones? And this idea of secrets worked well for that. And the other one is I picked it up from the Dark Souls games. So I was playing Bloodborne a lot at the time, and I loved how Bloodborne had hardly any comprehensible story, except you learn pieces of it by every item you picked up. And it was like these one-line things that would describe these weird groups. And you were starting to build like the big map on the wall with all the threads and pins to
looking like Charlie.
Try to figure out what the hell this game is about. And I was like, that's a really powerful way of doing storytelling. It's like, instead of dumping it on everybody, hang on, I've got a 12-page primer that you have to read on my campaign world. It's a lot better. It's like, you're in a place and there's a statue, and you're like, and the statue's head is broken off, and the statue's head is sitting in a big pile of brush. And you're like, well, who's the statue? And like, that's the statue of this warrior queen who, saved the land 200 years ago, and her name is X. And, you could just kind of throw these little tidbits out there that are based on what the characters are doing. So that a lot of people picked up on that one. A lot of the steps are pretty common steps, but that one was one that is relative. I haven't seen it in a lot of other places. But I had my first real, an exciting thing I saw on Reddit where somebody was recommending secrets and clues to somebody else without mentioning me at all. And at first I was like, hey, that's my idea. And then I was like, oh, no, wait, don't say anything, right? Like that means it's in that idea is starting to spread further than me, which is great. Why be upset about that?
Exactly.
So yeah, so that has worked out. And it's, I don't ascribe to any idea that like, hard work got me there and reading a lot. It's like, that was a lot of luck too, right? Like I got the right place at the right time with a lot of stuff, and 5th edition hit at the right moment, and we all kind of rode this wave of 5th edition's massive success. And I was lucky to be at that spot to be able to kind of influence it in what little way I have. So.
I mean, I don't think it's little. You've got a decent following.
Yeah, I mean, I'm I'm actually pretty happy. And I've said, like, I don't know if I want to get any more popular. Like, I'm pretty happy right now. I think there's a lot of.
You aim low, you can't miss, right? You set your expectations low, and then when they get broken,
yeah. I was on Matt Colville's Discord the other day, and I was like, he's got like 12 moderators in there. Like, that's, I don't want to have a Discord so big I've got 12 I'd have to have 12 moderators. Like, oh my God, right? So, yeah.
I mean, success can certainly has its ups and downs, but I think that's a great thing to chase after, and you're definitely chasing after it, because if you keep on doing what you're doing, you'll get there. Don't worry.
Yeah, but I'm happy. I'm happy right now. I'm content. I'm content with the way everything's been working out. Yeah.
See, that you're too good. If you were just sitting here saying, "Oh, I want it, I deserve it," then people wouldn't want it.
Nobody deserves it. Sorry to shatter everyone's expectation. No one deserves anything. We're all lucky.
Yeah, I mean, you're lucky. You got to create your own luck. It's this fine balance, and I certainly think that whether that be in D&D or in real life or whatever
anywhere
the
else,
case may be,
right.
you got to keep on chasing what you want, right?
Yep.
So of course I keep on blemishing basically how much content you're putting out here. I did want to say that you work way too damn hard. You're putting out a ton of content. Every time I blink, there's a new tweet up about something. Every time I log on to Sly Flourish, there's always something new there. So do you have an idea of how much time you are spending on putting out all this content and all this write-ups that you're doing?
It's pretty much all the time. So I have a day job. Right, and I'm lucky that
could have fooled me.
Yeah, I'm lucky that my day job gives me is flexible and gives me a fair bit of time to be able to work on other things. I'm very, very fortunate that way, and I'm also fortunate that the Sly Flourish stuff has done well enough that I'm able to work a reduced schedule, so I don't have to work a full week. And that gives me a day. I have what I call Sly Flourish Day on Fridays, where my Fridays are dedicated to just whatever the big projects are for Sly Flourish, and that's nice. I try to be really efficient with what I'm doing, so that I'm not, I'm for better or for worse, right? I try to figure out, like, if I'm going to start a new project, how do I make this project something that I'm going to be able to sustain for a while, or is it a one-off thing? Like, I know it's going to be a one-off thing. And an example was, I really hadn't been into streaming. I streamed one D&D game. I streamed a game with my friend Enrique Bertrand, the newbie DM, and he and I wanted to play Dragon of Icespire Peak, the adventure from the D&D Essentials kit. And that was one where, like, we looked at it and it's like, it's a brand new box set. It's a very popular adventure. It's an adventure for new DMs. It's also the first one-on-one potential adventure that Wizards of the Coast has put out. So how do we kind of like put all that together? And it's like, well, here's two guys. We played D&D before. We know that we get along really well. We'll play one-on-one. We'll play this adventure, and it'll help new players, and it'll help players that are just seeing it for the first time. It'll help people understand how one-on-one works. It was my other little secret that I could fit Theater of the Mind combat in there too, so I could point to it and say that's how Theater of the Mind combat works. If you want to see it, there it is. And it's short, so like we were able to do these like hour and 10-minute episodes once a week for about 7 or 8 weeks. I think it was 10 sessions. Then we went through something like that, about 10 sessions, and it was done, right? And then we finished the thing. And boy, like we got lots of people like, we'd love more of that. And we'd like, yeah, we'd love more of that. It was a lot of work, right? Like it took up most of my Friday to shoot it and to edit it and get it all ready. And I was like, it's that or more books. Like, I can't do both. So Enrique and I always talk about like, we'd love to do it again, but we're not sure how to do it. But I also figured out that like, yeah, I had a lot of people are like, I read Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, but I don't really understand what that looks like. Like I see that I read it and I see the outline, but I want to know like how you do it. Like, how do you do it? And I was like, well, I don't know. Let me put it on video and find out. And so I started doing a Twitch show on Sundays, and I picked like the perfect time, 10 a.m. on Sunday morning Eastern, which means it's 7 a.m. Pacific time. No one on Sunday wants to wake up and watch D&D stuff. But it turns out enough people do that this show's pretty good. We had 100 people on the other day, and I was like, wow, there's 100 people watching this thing. And so that was an opportunity to do like a 1-hour show where I go through the steps from Return. But what I'm doing is I'm actually preparing for the game that I'm running that day, because I run a game every Sunday afternoon. So that meant instead of doing I could either do my prep on my own, or I could do my prep on Twitch. Either way, I still have to do my prep. And I had that time allocated anyway. So it meant it didn't actually cost me anything to be able to do a Twitch show, because I was already doing my game prep, and now I got to do my game prep there. And then I could like cut it, and I don't edit it at all. And then I put it on YouTube, and now I've got a YouTube show. And then I can also feed the audio through Podbean, and now I've got a podcast. So it's like, I can do 3 different outputs for one show that I was already doing anyway. I just was doing it on my own. I wasn't doing it online. And that meant it really didn't take up much extra time. Like it kind of has a little bit. Like Sundays have gotten very, very busy.
Yeah, you do get sidetracked a little bit sometimes.
Oh, of course, right. But I love getting sidetracked, and yeah, right. And that's the other one. Is like, boy, that show's not for everybody, and that's fine. Like you like it, you don't. Like when I do these shorter, one thing I've gotten into is doing these like more straightforward YouTube kind of videos where I'm going to pick a topic and I shoot a show on that, and then I edit the hell out of it, and I get it down to like the 18-minute ideal. And then I put that online, and those get way more hits, right? Like I get many more views on those videos than I do on my Lazy DM Prep videos. But I get a pretty decent following of people who like the Lazy DM Prep ones, and I love doing it, and it doesn't cost me anything. So like, why wouldn't I do it? For that one.
Absolutely.
The art, yeah, and then the rest, like for Twitter and for the blog and everything like that, I've had a process in place that I've used for a long time, where like I write whenever. I was writing an article right before the show. And I write lots of articles, and I have a huge pile of articles that may never get published. And then my process isn't like write an article and post an article. It's like write an article, throw it in a big pile, forget about it for a month. And then when it's time to post an article, go through the slush pile, find the right one that I think is actually a good one that is worth talking about right now, edit that one and put it and get it ready to post. And that way I've always got stuff ready to go. And I can maintain a weekly article rate there without eating into everything else. So I would say that, the thing that's worked well for me is having really clear processes for how I make this stuff, right? It's not ad hoc. There's systems behind the tweets. I use Hootsuite for my Twitter stuff. And I've got, I think probably 2 months worth of daily D&D tips in there queued up already. Okay. So if I fell over with a heart attack right now, there'd be 2 more months of tips. Right. And then when I come up with tips, I do it after a game, I come up with 7. So on Thursdays, I sit down and I've got a little thing in my to-do list that pops up every Thursday saying time to your tips. And I go in and I think of what are the 7 things I learned from yesterday's game? What are 7 things I could pass along that kind of came up from yesterday's game? And those become the tips for the next week. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible to actually look at a calendar and not have any blank space, because I'm looking at my calendar and it's pretty empty.
Yeah, well, I mean, and so I'm very lucky also that my wife is into D&D, and so we talk about it all the time. We play all the time. And we have very few. We don't have any kids, so we have very few obligations. So I am able to spend a fair bit of time on this, and yeah, have really enjoyed doing so.
Yeah, I mean, you're putting out awesome work, and everyone appreciates it, and so something I wanted to go over real quickly is how big do you think that pile is of the blog in particular? Like how much do you think you have in that
Hang on,
little box?
If you wait, I'll tell you.
I am curious.
It's a lot.
Yeah,
I have a pile. I gotta find it here. I have a pile called unpublishable crap, which is also very large and will never. Let's see if this. I think if I do properties here, it'll tell me.
I mean, I think that's
there are
very
20.
Important.
Yeah, my drafts folder right now has 25 articles in it.
Wow,
that's the ones that have not yet really. A lot of those aren't fully fleshed out yet. They're ideas that are sitting in a text file. Then I have my ready for edits articles ready for edits. These are pretty fully finished. Those have 29 articles in that.
Wow.
So that's 25 plus 29 is what? 50, not 54. And then the unpublishable crap. Where's that? Unpublishable articles and dead bugs. That one has 108.
I'll tell you, not only do you have the mental discipline to say
150, 150 that have not been published.
Yeah, you've got
100 of those probably never will be.
No, but the thing is that not only do you have this discipline to sit down and forge a time, you also have something that a lot of people should have, and it's the ability to kill your darlings.
I kill a lot of darlings. Yeah,
you have to recognize that some things are just not going to work.
No, and they're just not that interesting. Yeah. Or I've written about them before. Like a lot of times, this happens to me far too often. I get an idea and I sit and I write a whole article and realize I already wrote it.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, and I look back on my blog. I'm like, I wrote this a year ago, and now what do? I've got 2 articles on the same topic.
I imagine that's going to be worse than 10 years down the line for you, because you're going to be like, I wrote this how long ago?
One thing I try to do whenever I'm kind of like hurting for an idea is I will go back through old articles and I will find topics that I think are still relevant and still work, and then I will pull that article up and re-edit it. And a lot of times it'll be significantly rewritten and then publish it again. And that way the site isn't sitting on like 5 copies of the same article. There's still many times, like there are definitely topics where I've basically written the same thing over and over again. But generally I try to, like, I want to have like 1 article about a topic, and there should only be 1, right? Like if I talk about reskinning monsters, I don't want 5 articles about reskinning monsters. I want 1 go-to article that's like, if you ever Google it, that's the one you should find. So so that works. But yeah, a lot of those dead bugs I think are articles that were written in some other way, or they're just useless. Yeah, they're just not relevant.
Yeah, and I mean that is a good thing that you're taking steps to avoid that confusion, because you always have to assume that you always have to make it so that experienced people know what they're looking for, and new people showing up can find what they want, right? And,
yeah, it's tricky. Yeah,
that's tough, and whether that is your website or a D&D book or whatever, you always have to keep into consideration new people and old people. And speaking of fifth edition,
a lot more new people.
Yeah, a lot more new people. It's funny how that works. You build that momentum, and it just gets it just avalanches out of control. Yeah. So speaking of that, 5th edition, we're seeing a prime time in 5e. It's been out for now 5 years, and it's going places. It's exploding out. Are you liking what you're seeing coming out of 5th edition?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, definitely. So I think like I have this discussion a lot, and I talk to lots of people. I talk to lots of people that are critical of it, and there's reason to be critical of it. But every so often I'll get like on someone's case. I've had people who are like, well, 5th edition really needs to do X. And you're like, obviously it doesn't, because here it is, and it's super popular. So to say it needed that, it would have died if it hadn't had that. When we say need, what do we mean? Because it seems like it's doing just fine. And I still argue that. Like, I've got things I don't like about it, and I've got things I wish it would have done, like everyone else. But I cannot. I mean, you can. Everybody can argue anything these days. But I wouldn't argue against its success, right? And it's telling that, like,
to argue against that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, people will. I've seen it.
You can yell at
you don't know what
wall.
you're talking about. Yeah, right. It doesn't seem like the data is backing you up on this. yeah, I'll look at it, and I'm just, yeah. So like the idea that like I'm about to run a Rime of the Frost Maiden game, and I wrote a 1-page campaign handout for it. And when I ran my Eberron game, which we started about a year ago, I had a bunch of house rules, but they were mostly like I actually wanted to do house rules just to try out house rules, not because I needed them, but because like I asked around, like, what are the most popular house rules? And like a lot of people have done house rules for critical hits. So I was like, okay, let me try that. And I heard some other ones about like sundering shields. Like if you have a non-magical shield, your shield can be destroyed to get rid of a critical hit. You know, I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of a neat idea. I'll put that in there. And then I had the one that now has become the Tasha rule, which is like you can move your attribute bonuses around.
Yeah.
You know, and that way you can pick whatever race you want and just move your attribute bonuses to other things, as long as they're not all piled up on one. And so I think I got a handful of others. But then I hit Frostmaiden, and I look back at like a year of running with these other house rules. I'm like, I don't really need any of those. Like, you know, I think I'm just going to say no, none. And the idea that like 5-6 years into this game's history, that with the core books and very little errata, really, I can say, yeah, I don't have any house rules, and we can still run a great game, and it still runs fine, and we all know what's going on. Like that is a really, really strong game that can do that. Like that to me shows like, my God, if you look at the errata for 4th edition, it was like, I think we looked at it the other day. It was like 90 pages of errata.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and much of it were like heavy mechanical changes. They were not minor edits. They were, you know, major elements changed how they worked. And then there were so many others that like they did not work well. Like, you know, we'd have things like a wall of fire, and the rogue could hit somebody and slide them 5, which meant they could be pushed in and out of a wall of fire and take damage every time. Right. And it was like, that seems like it's a lot more damage than they ought to be taking. And then the mechanics allowed for, and then they would do it all the time because it's this broken mechanic thing.
Oh, if something's optimal, people are going to find it.
Yeah. And, you know, talking to the developers of 4th edition, kind of candidly, you know, they were like, yeah, we didn't really play test. You know, they were like, they said that, like, you know, one thing they mentioned, these are people who don't work there anymore. You know, they mentioned that like, they had 2 different groups of people that were working on like different classes, and they had different ideas about like what a burst meant. So then one group would say burst 5, thinking it was one thing, and another group would say burst 5, meaning thinking something else. And then you had these wildly different powers, you know, and it was a mess. So, you know, I mean, again, I played 4th and we loved it, but you know, it's nothing like 5th as far as resilience goes, I don't think. And I think it proves it. Like it's still in the top 100 best-selling books on Amazon, right? The Player's Handbook, the first one. So, yeah. So I think I'm very happy with it. I'm very happy to see a lot of people coming in. One thing that I've mentioned in other places is like when 4th edition was around, when 3rd and 4th edition was around, there were a bunch of like Gen Xers that were talking about the fact that that the game was going to die with us, right? That like this was it. Like everyone else is going to be playing World of Warcraft, and we're going to be playing D&D. And no one's going to want to play, because why would you, when you have all the, you know, computer games are so much more popular, massive, you know, MMOs are so big and so making so much money. And, you know, I met my wife in an MMO. So it's like, wow, there's a lot of power in MMOs. But you know, no one's having that conversation now, right? That no one's saying like, oh, I wonder if it's going to die with the old people. Look at all the young people that are playing it, right? Like tons and tons. Like, you know, I was talking to a coworker of mine today, and he's reading the monster manual now because he hasn't played since 1st, but his kids are playing, and he's like, I don't want them to get the upper hand on me, so I got to start reading the D&D books again. You know, and they're young kids, so like, yeah, you know, seeing people, you know, one of the players in my group, his daughter is just 10 years old, but she still gets on to like hear about what's going on in the game and asks her dad about what's going on in the game. She's interested.
You got to start
so
early.
I think, yeah. And I think that's fascinating. I love it. And yeah, there's so much like, you know, getting nerdy about it and thinking about like, well, how come computers haven't eaten the lunch on this thing? It's like, well, human brains are so much more powerful than computers are when it comes to imagination. You know, and we're not even close when it comes to computational power of a human brain.
Yeah.
And when you got 6 of them around a table, and you've got the right tools to be able to channel those brains to build this world and this story and this thing that goes on, you can't get that in a computer system. The best you can have with a computer is it can help pave the path and make it a little easier for you to share that story with like audio and video chat and dice rolling and virtual tabletops and everything else. So yeah, I think I'm really happy with it, and I'm really interested. Of course, I've always got my like eyes open, like what's coming out, what's happening. And the only thing I've got there is there's no way to predict.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I love, one of the things I love doing is like whenever there's an announcement that a new D&D book is coming out, I love to post a tweet saying, what do you think it's going to be? And in many other circumstances like this, you have this sort of wisdom of the crowds effect where the median answer, like the answer that's most common is usually the right answer. So if you say, hey, here's a picture of a cow, this is an experiment people actually did. Here's a picture of a cow. How much does it weigh? Right. And then like 10,000 people say how much it weighs. It turns out the median value is pretty much it, right? They're pretty on it. That's not true with D&D predictions.
No, not at all.
No, and like I love looking at it. And I think when Frost Maiden came out, I think it was either I don't think it was Tasha's. I think it was Frost Maiden. And I asked like what people thought it was, and you get like 1 million people with Planescape and Spelljammer.
Yeah, a lot of people thought Spelljammer, absolutely.
Right, and I had to change it to like stop saying what you want it to be, and say what you actually think it will be. Right, like step out of your own shoes for a minute and ask yourself, what do you think that you would make? And no one ever gets it, right? Like no. in the case of Candlekeep, right? Candlekeep Mysteries. There were a few people that were really close. So they said, I think it's going to be an anthology of a bunch of short adventures. And I'm like, okay, you won. Like, I'm going to give that one to you because that was really close to what it turned out to be. And there were, I think of like 70 replies, 10 of them were that. So about 100 replies. About 10% of the people actually got close enough that I would consider that to be pretty good. But 90% weren't even anywhere near it. And yeah, so that's always fascinating to me, which means I can't guess either. I'll just sit back and see what happens.
I know a lot of people
try to carve my little part.
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of people wanted it to be Dragonlance because, of course, that whole
the news on Dragon. But it's like just because you heard about it in the news 3 weeks ago doesn't mean that that's the only thing that's going on. Right? Like it takes 2 years to make a book. Right? It takes a long time.
That's something a lot of people don't realize is that book started.
That doesn't turn around like that. Yeah, it doesn't. Things don't get whipped around. They're not. They're not reacting to the immediate thing, right? It takes them time to steer that big ship, and producing a book is a long process.
I can't imagine like the amount of people they have on deck working on these books, how many people that has to go through and how many processes and how many edits oh my Lord.
Proofs and shipping and distributors and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, because they work with little people, they work with small little hobby shops, and that's got to be a nightmare too.
Yep.
Golly. And I'm certainly looking forward to all that fun stuff coming out. So you are happy with the distribution of there's this many modules, and then the fourth book is a sort of like a catch-all book sort of thing. You're okay with that?
Yeah, I mean it's working, right? And it's I don't. So one of my other rules, it sounds like a pretty cynical rule, probably because it is like so I'm saying this to myself, not as advice to others, but if it works for you, you can take it. Which is like, don't let WotC drive your happiness with the game, right? I see this a lot on Reddit and on Twitter, and we have conversations on my Discord server about it, and it's like, don't let WotC's a company, and they didn't invent D&D. They inherited D&D, right? They bought it. And the people that are working on it now, they're great. They're smart people. But they weren't working on it forever. They picked it up from other people who were working on it forever, right? And so you got guys like, Wolfgang Bauer, who was, the editor of Dragon Magazine forever ago, right? And built Planescape and built all these things, and he's on his own. So take a hard look at the stuff Kobold Press is putting out, because one of the original people that was working on D&D when it was with, I think between TSR and I think Wolfgang actually was one of the people that switched over from TSR to Wizards of the Coast. He's got a lot of experience in what D&D looks like, and that's getting channeled into the books that Kobold Press is putting out. So the good news is that the resilience of D&D, like I say this a lot, like D&D can survive a nuclear war. Right? There are not many hobbies we have. Like none of your electronic hobbies are going to survive a nuclear war, right?
Spoiler
but D&D
alert,
could, right? So like it's super resilient. There's nothing Wizards of the Coast or any other company could do that would break D&D. I bought a book called Old School Essentials, right? Which is sort of a repackaging of the BX, the old D&D BX books. It's this beautiful thread-bound, nice digest-sized hardcover book. And I was just holding it in my hand, like, this is it. Like, this is all you need, right? Like, Dungeons & Dragons survives when this survives, right? And like, any of us can do it, right? Like because of the OGL, we can write things that are directly compatible, but even a lot of these stuffs aren't even using the OGL and they're still compatible. So yeah, so the game can survive anything, which means that WotC isn't unlike Blizzard with World of Warcraft. Like Blizzard controls World of Warcraft completely. Like you don't get to decide that you want your World of Warcraft to go in a different direction. Right? You have to convince Blizzard that what you want is what they want to do. It doesn't matter with Wizards of the Coast. If you want more adventures, go write them, or go buy 1 million of them that are on the DM's Guild, or buy old ones. You know, when people are like, "Oh, it really sucks that they're not putting out Planescape." Planescape's out. I bought it the other day. Right? I bought the 2nd edition version for like $9. You know, and so I've got Planescape. I just have to do a conversion, but it's as good as it was back in 2nd edition because it is the 2nd edition one. Right? So like. Yeah, the idea of like, you know, we give them, I think we give them too much weight. Like, I like what they put out. I buy every book they put out. You know, I think Tasha's is great. I think I'm looking forward to running Rime of the Frost Maiden, and I think that the main game is solid. I don't whatever they want to do is okay, right? Because I'll either like it or I won't, and that's fine, right? And I've got many avenues that I can take. To continue to enjoy the game. And so Wizards doesn't have to follow anybody's drive or direction for us to be happy with D&D, because we all hold it in our hands anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. When the zombie apocalypse happens, I'm going to
we're good. Like, get in your vault. Yeah. Right.
I'm going to grab some dice, and I don't even need the books anymore. I've got everything memorized, right? Yeah, I can just go ahead and throw some dice. I'm pretty
sure I've got Fate accelerated in my head, right? Exactly. Like, I could probably play a basic version of D&D, you know. Yeah, with just all I need is some kind of thing to do randomness.
You don't even need dice. Maybe it's just
a coin flip.
Exactly.
I mean, you've seen people that are like in prisons that are playing D&D, and they're not allowed to have dice. So they have these like wheels that they've made with like a paper clip and a piece of paper, and they've made all of the dice. I've seen it. Like they have these like dials, and they spin it, and it's sort of, you know, D4. You spin it, and you get a 2. You spin it for the 20. You know, they've figured it out, right?
And I think that's something that will continue on, is that creativity, not just from Wizards of the Coast, but from the community.
Yeah, everywhere. Right.
The community is really shaping D&D, because one thing I really want to talk about is the emergence of these Kickstarters. These Kickstarters are killing it. Yep. Individual people or even startup little companies are just going ahead and saying, hey, give us some money, we'll put out an awesome product. And it's working. It is phenomenal. And you yourself, of course, you're taking some bits and pieces into this. I see your name on a whole bunch of things. So yeah, the fact that the community is really shaping a game is, as you stated before, you would not see that in any other medium. You would not see TV shows take their own life. You don't see movies take their own life. You don't see whatever. It's so unique to this hobby, and that it just adds to what I love so much about it. And so. You know, we have the community taking it in one way, Wizards of the Coast taking it another way, and you can go ahead and you can go left.
I don't know how unaligned they are, but you know,
they're along the same path. You can go left, you can go right, you can go backwards, and you can, as you said, you know, pick up Planescape, read the book.
Yeah, right.
You don't need to wait for Wizards of the Coast to put out.
Again, like I think the Old School Essentials Kickstarter really, you know, knocked it out of the park, and that was like a game that's been 50 years old, right? Like.
That's another thing too, is the OSR, the renaissance of like young people are for some reason picking up a book that says, okay, it's similar to the rules of first edition, let's play that. And you know, the fact that is a thing is incomprehensible. You wouldn't pick up a 50-year-old video game, you know, but you would. There's a
lot of retro play these days.
There's some people doing that. You don't see too many people playing, you know, Pong, you know, just the basic version. But you do see a lot of people picking up the OSR games, and there is a lot of those coming out. Not just Old School Essentials, but you know, I can't even name all of them. Lamentations of the Flame Princess, or whatever.
Mjorkberg.
Mjorkberg is huge. I just saw that they put out. Was it you that I saw posted the trademark thing? That you can do now. You can.
No, it wasn't me. Somebody else did that. Okay. Yeah, but I saw it.
Yeah. You can make your own Mjorkborg stuff, and that's fantastic. Right. The fact that, like, you know, we're getting community content for community content, essentially. Sure. Like that's the level that we're going down to now.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see what comes of that.
Yep.
So yeah, you have been recently. I've noticed you've been really into the idea of point crawls.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm very happy with is like learning, you'd think like after playing for 40 years and after writing about it for 10 and playing all these different systems that like, oh, I'm probably going to see a lot of the same stuff I saw. And there's like, no, I'm constantly learning new stuff. Like, first of all, playing during the pandemic has completely changed how I think about D&D and how I play D&D. And I've learned a ton from that. And that's been, I'm happy. It's obviously a horrible tragedy. But I'm lucky that I was able to get something from it, and getting a different viewpoint into this game that I've been playing for so long was one of them. And I think probably point crawls were part of that too. But yeah, I think that, so I've largely been playing published adventures for D&D since 5th edition came out. And I stopped and ran an Eberron campaign for the past year. And that meant I had to stretch a lot of new muscles. I had to train a lot of new muscles to build my own campaigns, which I usually don't do, right? And I kind of like, why would I build another campaign? Like I got Wizards of the Coast. How much do they spend? How much money are they spending to make Rime of the Frost Maiden? More than I'm going to spend, right? So like, and I get it all for $50. Like, what a deal! Like, how, I think if I said that it cost them $100,000 to make that book, I bet you that's way under how much it actually costs, right?
Oh, yeah.
But let's pretend it was that low. That's still $100,000 worth of effort for $50. Pretty good leverage.
Sign me up.
Yeah, sign me up. And that's what I did with the Eberron book. Is like, they made an Eberron campaign book instead of a Eberron adventure. And I'm like, I'm going to squeeze every ounce out of that campaign book I can get. I want to use every map in there. I want to, they're going to start in Sharn. I'm starting in Sharn, right? And so I ran it, but I realized that I was running a lot of overland places without any structure for how to do that. And they felt linear to me, and it's like, I don't know. And I remember like I'd have a ruined city, and I'd say like, I'm just going to name 10 places in this ruined city. But I never like defined like how they get from place to place. I literally gave them a map, and I'm like, here are 10 locations, you pick, and I'll run an encounter along the way, during your journey. But I'm like, this feels weird. Like, you'd think there'd be a better way to handle something like this. And I started looking around. I've been following the Alexandrian, Justin Alexander's blog, fantastic blog.
Oh yeah.
And he had been talking a lot about point crawls, and I was like, he talked about hex crawls, he talked about point crawls. So I started reading his stuff, and then I sort of fell into it, right? And I was like, wow, there's all these other people writing about point crawls. This is this whole thing that's, again, it's been around for 40 years, right? Like, people have been doing point crawls for a long time, but I'd never even heard of it before. And I guess it really got defined like about 2006, I think it was, that the Hill Canton blog wrote their first thing about point crawls for RPGs. So even before 4th, right? Like deep in the 3rd edition days, I guess that was. And so I was like, this is a really interesting idea. Let me play with this and let me research it. And as often happens with a lot of things, I'll just sort of fall into the topic. I'll read everything I can on it. I'll try it for a bunch of my games, and then I'll try to distill down what I found to be really useful, or turn it into either a video or an article or both. And that's what I did. I think last week was the article on point crawls. And I find it to be this really nice structure that has a lot of flexibility. It sort of hits on concepts of dungeon design that I'd already been familiar with, like the idea of Janelle Jacquet's style of, Justin Alexander calls it Jacqueting the dungeon. this idea of building dungeons that are not these linear paths, but have like loop backs and have shortcuts and have secrets and have multi layers and have multiple entrances and lots of choice, like meaningful choices you can make. Meaningful choices and interesting discoveries while going through a dungeon. It turns out you do the same thing with point crawls, right? You can have loop backs, and you can have multiple branches and secrets and, shortcuts and all kinds of things that you can do in a overland travel as well. For anybody that, it's probably way too late now, but for anybody that doesn't know what a point crawl is, the idea of a point crawl is you look at a larger overland area and you define it by locations and the connections between locations, the routes between locations. And it's like roads and rivers and paths, gateways, secret paths, whatever things connect two places. And like, if you start to watch movies like Lord of the Rings and think about like, oh, they got from here to there by this route, anytime you're talking about two different places of the route between them, you've got a point crawl. But you don't want to just build this. This took me a little while to figure out. You don't want to just build like multiple paths that are all perpendicular to one or all parallel to one another. You actually want to have lots of different paths and lots of interconnections and lots of like secret paths. Like maybe when you get to the giant statue on the hill, it's only by the time you get there that you realize, wow, there's a whole other trail here that leads to the Forbidden Forest that we didn't know about. Right. And we could take that and go right to the Forbidden Forest, which would have had to been this whole other route. Turns out there's a shortcut here, and that gives some meaningful discovery and interest to players. So I only really picked that up on the tail end of my Eberron game, but I used it for about 3 or 4 locations. And it worked really well. And it's really fun to find a structure like that that's been around a while, but I never heard of it.
That's the thing
there's a fair bit of...
I'm sure every DM at some point got tired of the hex crawl in the early days because
right.
Okay, we're rolling for an encounter for the 17th time. As you're making your way back from the dungeon.
Yeah.
At some point, you sit there and say, "Okay, instead of that, one cool thing happens."
Right.
Instead of it just being procedurally generated, you do sit there and give it a structure, but it didn't really become what it is until semi recently. And I think that is important that you sit there and decide, is your game going to be that hex crawl where you roll for this and that, or is it a point crawl, or is it a mishmash, or is it just you teleport? Nothing in between. Screw it.
Yeah, and when I ran Tomb of Annihilation, I ran it as a hex crawl, and I said like the people are like, well, how long did you run a hex crawl? I'm like, till we didn't, right? Till we got bored, right? And then it was like, I'll describe a route, and then you'll get to a place. So it was like we kind of did point crawls eventually. I didn't know that that's what it was called, and I didn't have any structure for it. And it would be really interesting to go back and run Tomb of Annihilation as a point crawl and see how it plays.
I will tell you, every single DM that's ever ran TOA has ran the hex crawl, not as
about halfway down the map, right? And they're like, all right,
you're like, okay, there's only so many times.
As soon as they have like access to food and water and cure disease, right? They're like, what am I doing? Like, why are we rolling all these dice? So
and on to the main quest. Let's go.
Yeah, right. Let's get to Nanny Poo Poos and get on with our
exactly. I mean, it really is intrinsic to the story that you're trying to tell. Are you telling a story where your players are involved with these NPCs? In which case, get your players to the NPCs. Or are you telling a story where, like you mentioned, like Bloodborne style? Are you telling a story through the world where they come across that statue that tells a bit about the world and all that? And whatever it is, just whatever you decide, whether it's a point crawl, hex crawl, no crawl, sprint, whatever it is, you have to decide, is it going to serve narratively well? Right. And I personally think that a point crawl, more often than not can serve very narratively well. I just saw your picture in Descent into Avernus, like a point crawl in the city.
That was Justin Alexander's picture.
So like the idea, it doesn't have to be this global spanning, you're going dozens and dozens of miles. It could be you could have a point crawl where it's just a few hundred feet, or maybe even less.
And that's when I've run a couple of cities in Eberron that were like ruined cities that were all based on point crawls, and it works great because you have like these. I mean, obviously that one's nice because you have streets and you have like underground passages and you have sort of other interesting ways to get from one point to another, and you can sort of give it to the players. That was another thing I had to figure out, was like, how much do you reveal your point crawl to your players so that they know the path? And I was like, well, kind of as much as you would show a dungeon. Like, they know what they can see, and maybe they have all the overt paths, but they don't have any of the covert paths, and then you add those in over time.
I think that is something very important to 5th edition as well, because in 5e, I think with all these modules, if you run these modules, you would think that if you're going to show a dungeon to your players, there's just one big old map. But you don't need to have a big old map. It could just be, you're in this room. Oh, and if combat ensues, then so be it. The art of theater of the mind has been lost, I feel like, because of 5e rules in particular do require more, drawing of rulers or whatever, but. I mean, you don't need them, but there's a lot of people that sit there and say, "How can I get the best fireball here?"
Yeah, right.
Start measuring it out.
I've been spending a lot of time on questions like that, trying to figure it out and like how to. That's actually what I was writing about. Was how to run easy battles. Like we should be running more easy fights than I think we typically do.
Yeah.
And I think a reason we don't run easy fights is because people are tied to a grid, and that means a battle map. And if you have a battle map and minis, that means it's an hour. Why would I run an easy fight in an hour? Why not write a hard fight in an hour? So
just do the standard Chris Perkins rule of you can hit two people.
Yeah, that's right.
Just
right.
Say
and
that.
If you overgo it, right? If you say like, how many can I fireball? You're like 16. Like, really? I'm like, yep. I'm like, wow, this is so much better in the grid. I only get 5 in the grid. So how do you make it more beneficial to play in Theater of the Mind? How do you give
You're
them
fighting
more
in the
than they would
tavern,
normally do?
and you can totally cut the chandelier.
Yeah. I mean, like I have a rule that like I don't care how big your blast is. If you only ever want to hit one target, you can always hit one target, right? No matter like even if it's surrounded by your friends.
You got to point
put
directly
it up above
up
their head,
yeah,
right? Just so the curve hits the top of their head, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, you got to think in three dimensions.
And I do feel like a lot of people do get lost when they're staring directly down, craning their neck at a 2-dimensional space, and I do think that that Theater of the Mind can certainly alleviate that, but you do need to work on it. Both you and your players need to buy into it for sure.
There's got to be a lot of agreements, a lot of common understandings of how things like that are going to work. I'm lucky that both my groups have now succumbed to my maddening ways, and they just. But I think it was on Sunday where everyone was like, "Hey, could we see this on a battle map?" I'm like, "All right, let me whip up Albert Rodeo and I'll show a battle map."
That's when you say, "No, I didn't prepare it. We're playing."
Well, I actually was able to whip it up in like 5 minutes. So.
No, you just say you don't have it prepared.
I don't have time for that. Okay.
You have to do it my way.
Right. It was a pretty complicated fight. There was a lot going on. Like 3 different kinds of monsters, and it's crazy.
Oh yeah, so you're of course been going ham on all this stuff, and we talked about a bit about what we've seen so far. What are you looking forward to next from Wizards of the Coast? I'm curious. Because you are just now diving into Icewind Dale Realm with Frost Maiden, by the way. Welcome to the community, because that Discord is going to help you out a lot.
Yep. I've been lurking on that Discord and dropping in some like there's I could spend an hour talking about Realm of the Frost Maiden alone.
That's for the next podcast.
Right. I don't know. I hate to be like a killjoy. I can talk about like what would I want, right? Like that's. Because I have no idea what they're going to do, I don't want to be disappointed. I haven't really been disappointed. I'm always like, okay, like that's great. I would love to see more DM focused books, but on the other hand, I'll just write those myself, right? Like, that's fine.
They're allowing you that privilege.
Yeah, if they don't want to write it, that's fine. Like, I'll just go do it myself. But I feel like it's probably one of my complaints about like Tasha's is a fantastic book with a lot of new player options. There's really, there are a few tools in there for DMs. Like if you like puzzles, it's got tons of puzzles in it. And if you like, weird ass random effects that you can throw into lots of different places, it's got that too. It doesn't have a lot of like DM subsystems. And I would love to see, like, they have a lot of them in the Dungeon Master's Guide. I'd love to see more DM subsystems, optional systems that they could put in place. And of course, the ones I want, the big one I want is some kind of abstract combat system.
Yeah.
Like I would love for them to answer the question of how many people can you hit with a fireball. They actually do. The Dungeon Master's Guide has that, right? It actually says like, I think it's the radius divided by 5. So 4, for fireball, it's 4. So they have that in there, but I'd love more of that, right? I'd love more of like, well, how do you handle opportunity attacks? And a lot of other systems have approached this with zone-based combat. Like Robert Schwab with Shadow of the Demon Lord wrote a whole supplement about how to do zone-based combat. Fate does zone-based combat. 13th Age, a D&D variant that, a lot of the, 2 of the creators from 3rd and 4th edition made, uses abstract combat with abstract distances of short, medium, long, and engaged and stuff like that. And I think with, a couple pages of work, Wizards could say like, hey, here's how we do it. And to me, the frustrating thing is they all do it that way now. If you look at the designers and you see them running their games, they're running Theater of the Mind.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Chris Perkins did not pull out a battle map when he had the Stranger Things cast on.
No.
He did Theater of the Mind. Well, how about like a page of advice that Chris Perkins could give us on how to get it on board? And it's like, it's one thing for Mike Shea to say, hey, here's how Theater of the Mind works. And it's something else for Chris Perkins to say it. And I think players will buy into it more if they have a book that they bought from Wizards of the Coast that says, this is how we do Theater of the Mind. It add a little bit of you know, a little, you know, I don't know, a little bit of extra weight to the idea. I'd love to see something like that. I like their focus of big, meaty campaign adventures. I think they're probably the only company that can get away with that and actually have people play them regularly. Cobalt Press has done a couple. They did the Tales of the Old Margrave, but that wasn't even a campaign. That was like a bunch of woodsy adventures built around Margrave Forest. They did Empire of the Ghouls though, which I actually really want to play. It looks really cool. But now I don't think they've done another. They have Southlands, but that's more of a campaign guide. So there's not a lot of people putting big, meaty campaign adventures together. And the interesting thing about it from Wizards of the Coast's perspective is that they build, it's more than just having a community around 5th edition. They're building a shared experience around each of these worlds. So like when we talk about running Tomb of Annihilation, we all know what we're talking about. We all had different experiences there. We all had different outcomes. I'm sure we could share, but sometimes those differences are where the conversations are fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we can all talk about it. We can all talk about Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. We can all talk about Storm. I was talking with a guy on my Discord today about Storm King's Thunder and about how wildly different those campaigns are because that adventure is so wide in its scope that nobody's running the same kind of situation in that one. So I think that that's a really strong area for them. I expect that they're doing well. Like it's the first time adventures ever sold well. You know, the big joke was that like, you know, no previous, I think this is true, you know, no previous version of D&D made profits off of their adventures.
No.
You know, yeah, they typically put them out to help support the main books, but they recognize that. And I think Gygax said this. He's like, why would I make a Greyhawk world? DMs make their own worlds. Like that's mine. Go make your own. Right. And in my polls and surveys, 50%, roughly, you know, about half, a little bit more than half of dungeon masters that I've polled say they make their own campaign worlds. Right. Now, the interesting thing is if you ask the other half and say, what worlds do you play in? It's like Forgotten Realms and Eberron, you know, they don't play on anyone else's world. They play in the big ones. Same thing with published adventures. They'll play Wizards published adventures. They typically don't run other people's published adventures. Yeah. So I'd be happy with them doing more of that. I don't, you know, I'm such a killjoy. Like, I don't know if I need another monster book. Like, I guess I like the way that Mordenkainen's and Volo's worked because they were more than just a monster book. They were books that talked about the ecology of monsters and offered a lot of other things. Like Volo had those maps in it, like maps of the layers of monsters, which I thought was great. So I could do with another thematic one of that. Like if they were to do like a 5th edition version of Libris Mortis, the Book of the Dead, or the Draconomicon, you know, and say like, hey, we're going to pick like a particular type of monster. We're going to look at undead, you know, and we're going to do a big ass book of you know, you want vampires? Here's 12 new types of vampires, right? Here's ways to turn any monster into a vampire. Here's a whole vampire lair. You know, here's the ecology of vampires. Here's, you know, that'd be pretty cool.
Absolutely.
But I don't know what they're going to do, you know, and there's always chatter about, 6th edition is going to come any day now. No. And people have like drawn charts to show the line. And you're like, you know, the interesting to me about that is like, if you look at every previous time they've made an edition, it was based on a particular personality who drove the decision to make it, not on some kind of market thing. So it's like every version had a person who said, I want to make a new version of D&D right now for this reason. And we don't know if that person's going to show up or not, right? Or if they're already there or not. So I don't know what they're going to do. And it's like business wise, it doesn't seem like a good move because they're got
capitalizing.
They're like the 60th best-selling book on Amazon. Why would you know, and do you really think that you'll blow that away with a new one? Like, no, you're going to probably split the market because you're going to get people like me who are like, I'm happy with 5th. Why would I want to play 6th? You know,
when you got Joe Manganiello selling 5th edition to people, you're not gonna want to move on to the next thing immediately. You're gonna wait a hot minute on it.
Yeah, I would guess if my guess was worth anything at all, I would say that we're at least 2 years out from anything like that because Tasha's came out. You're not going to put a book like Tasha, which is also on the top 100 best-selling Amazon books. It's higher than the Player's Handbook. You're not going to put a book like that out and then immediately change editions because, you're making a lot of money in those other books. So there's no good business reason to. But it's not always business. It's not always business reasons that drove other editions either.
No, but something to note is the whole 5th edition mentality of putting out all these books is when you're selling a module, you're selling to only a 5th of your consumer base. And right. I think that's something that a lot of people seem to forget is at the end of the day, Wizards of the Coast is a company. So they're selling these modules that only the DM is going to buy. And then, of course, they put out these other books, which their design philosophy on the other books is let's put in something for players and for DMs. So that way they can sell a bit more, like Tasha's, of course.
Yep.
So definitely we're going to see that trend of, hopefully they put in like, extra stuff for the DM here, but also, maybe here's an extra set of ancestries or other backgrounds or da-da-da. Right. And that's something I'm looking forward to because, like you said, I think 5e is just so modular that you can easily swap in and swap out mechanics of distance and range and, it would
that's
not
what I'd really... Yeah, I'd love to see them capitalize more on that. Like, I wish we had more of these, like, again, like an Unearthed Arcana, a true Unearthed Arcana book that was like, here's a whole bunch of different subsystems for doing a whole bunch of different things. And I feel like we got a taste of that we got more of it, I think, in Xanathar's Guide than we did in Tasha's.
Yeah.
But I'd love to see another book that had more stuff like that because I think there's a lot of room for it.
For sure. So, and, I think, much for the distances, they could have let's make 5e easier and kid-friendly, and then let's have another one which is hardcore death mode engage, and, I think
the community will fill that in, right? Like, you have 5e hardcore mode, right? A very, very popular third-party supplement that talks about how to kind of take your 5th edition game and turn it into that old school sort of death, high threat version of D&D.
You hit 0, you die.
You hit 0, you die, right? And that book really, I'm fascinated. Like, I never want to play it, but I'm fascinated by it. Like, it's not my kind of D&D, but I totally respect the approach that they took, and I think it's I think that idea of like a wrapper for 5th edition is a really, really powerful tool. So I think where Wizards isn't doing it, the nice thing is there's no reason somebody else can't.
That's the next thing I want to hop into is so you don't want to put any expectations on Wizards of the Coast is what it sounds, or at least on yourself of Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah.
But do you have anything that you want to see from the community?
What would I like to see from the community? That's a good question. I don't want to see the stuff I'm going to do. Right?
You want you want everyone to just stop so you can do everything.
No, I don't want to do everything. That's for sure.
No, you can't get to it.
I would love, So I would love to see a whole bunch of new Eberron campaigns. So, the Oracle of War campaign series is really cool. A big Mournland, exploring the Mournland sort of idea. I'd love to see one that's set in the more, like set in Sharn. I would love to see somebody do like a campaign series that's set in Sharn on the DM's Guild. The DM's Guild has this ability for people to write big, thick, powerful adventures.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that like Keith Baker is writing stuff for Eberron on the DM's Guild, his Exploring Eberron book. I've got a copy sitting right here. And, it's a huge bestseller. And it's only possible that for him to be able to do something like that because the DM's Guild is around. So I think there's a lot of room for sort of bigger adventure series set in the Forgotten Realms from groups that are doing it on the DM's Guild. I think I would like to see more wrappers, more things that like take a look at 5th edition and sort of shift its focus and shift its direction into new areas. Like MT Black. I think MT Black is the one that did this. I always get MT Black and Anthony Joyce. Maybe they did it together. Did like a Cthulhu sort of mystery
Call
adventure on Drive-Thru. Well, there's Call of the Deep. No. But there's another one of I forget the name of it. I suck. It's on Drive-Thru. So it's OGL.
Unfortunately, MT Black has put his name on probably like 10,000 things at this point, so it's pretty hard to track
I know.
down.
It's going to be hard to figure that out. You're right.
But
he hasn't done a lot of stuff on there it is. Hey, I found it. Haha. Shows you. Whispers in the Dark it's called.
Yes.
Which is a Cthulhu-y sort of mystery rules, Saturday morning scenarios. Yeah, Matt Corley and Empty Black did it, and yeah, they have a hardcover version of it, which is a yeah, it's like a, how do we do like a Call of Cthulhu kind of game with 5th edition rules set in a like the 1800s, right? And it's great. Like that's I'd love to see more stuff like that, where there's always these arguments that people have of like, oh, why would you make something with 5th edition? And it's like, well, everybody knows it. So it's like, it's a good, it's a good tool. It's got good foundation to it. So why not use it for other things? And we've seen science fiction, and we've seen cyberpunk, and we've seen now, a lot of Call of Cthulhu. And I think there's a lot of options for genres.
Yeah.
I think there's also, when you see things like Mjorkberg, where they have like it's just like literally dripping in flavor, that where like the rules are really lightweight, but the theme is so strong. I think there's a lot of neat areas for people to sort of explore those themes and try them out, and not all of them will be successful. But the nice thing is, in a lot of ways, the barrier to entry is low, so you're probably not going to go bankrupt, like you would have if you tried to do this 30 years ago, sort of chasing your own dream. But yeah, I'd love to see more, like, think of what's Blue Rose, is that the name of it? The sort of romance fantasy game. I think Jeremy Crawford worked on it before.
Was it Blue Rose?
I always get these confused. I think it was Green Ronin had it's called Blue Rose, and it's romantic fantasy RPG. So what, could people do the 5e hardcore mode for romance fantasy, right? Instead of super deadly, like grim, fingernails torn on the stone wall kind of stuff. What would a steampunk flying airship romance thing be like? I think that there's a lot of ways to take the genre, the genre of 5e and go with it. Something else I'd like to see, and I expect we'll see more of this, is that if you think about the core books, we have the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual. What if you took one of those books and rewrote it to take a totally different approach, but still use the other two? So an example would be, what if you had a completely different way of thinking about monsters? Okay. And you wrote an entirely different monster manual that's where the monsters are designed completely differently, but they're still compatible with 5th. And so players who have Xanathars and Tashas in the Player's Handbook still play their characters exactly the same way. But all the way that combat encounters happen, they're built differently. So, they still play by the same general rules, but like the construction of monsters are very different. I think we just heard Matt Colville talked about the fact that they're looking at doing a monster book. Yeah. And Matt Colville's talked a lot about action-oriented monsters. So what will it be like to have a book of monsters that are built around the themes of action-oriented monsters? And Matt Colville is also a big fan of 4th edition. So what would it be like to take more 4th edition design ideas and build it into monsters that are compatible with 5th? And I don't know, like that to me will be a fascinating, sort of a fascinating approach. So yeah, so those are some of the things I think I'd like to see the community try with. I think there's a lot of ways we can expand this. There's a lot of, think how many players' handbooks are out there. So how do we capitalize on the fact that there's millions of players' handbooks out there? How do we do the other parts around it? How do we write like a different way of DMing a game? Or I always forget the name of the author, but there's a lot of like how to play D&D solo, right? Yeah. How to play D&D one-on-one. So, there's so many different ways we can play this game. It'd be neat to see more products that we're taking different approaches for how we run our D&D games.
Absolutely. And, we mentioned this so long ago, but 5th edition, one of its strengths is the fact that it can stand the test of time in regards of the mechanics, but also equally as strong is its modularity. The fact that
right.
I don't feel like some of the other editions you could have, taken away so much and then replaced it and still have it feel like the edition. Because, that's a whole different, that's how we got Pathfinder, is someone took some stuff from 3rd, and there you go. And, it's impressive to see that 5th edition has this huge legacy now behind it that all these people are going to be adding this fantastic stuff with
Yeah,
it.
I mean, in a lot of ways, Kobold Press has been working with this. Like Kobold Press has the Midgard Player's Handbook,
Yeah.
right? And it sits on top of the D&D Player's Handbook, but adds all these races and subclasses that are unique to Midgard. It's a good modular. It hits that modular approach.
Yeah, and I certainly want to see more. I want to see Monster Man. Like we have seen like some products like Monster Manual 2 that came out,
Yep.
and that's a fantastic product.
Yeah, they're big sellers, right? On the DM Guild, those two. I think there's two different new sort of. I don't think it really like tackled a different design, but like the folks at 2C Gaming, so like Ryan from 2C Gaming hangs out in my Discord chat. We talk all the time about this stuff, and 2C Gaming has a very different approach for how to handle really big, nasty monsters, right? And they write their books around these ideas, and they do not operate the same way that you would expect 5th edition D&D monsters. You sort of have to learn a different approach, but it works. I think it works really well.
Yeah, and I'm so thankful that we already went through the hard part of learning this new system. Let's go ahead and just sprinkle on whatever you want, and you're good to go.
Right.
So you mentioned what you see or don't want to see from Wizards of the Coast, from the community, but what do you want to see from yourself?
So obviously, I'm really interested in sort of these rule supplement ideas. So that one thing I've been exploring a lot. I've done a lot of this for my Patreon backers. I've been obsessing about it. Like I've been almost up nights thinking about it. Of the power of randomness in our D&D games, and where the right level of where to inject the right level of randomness to make our games more interesting. And, part of it is like, if you pull out the Dungeon Master's Guide, it's got tons of random tables in there. Some of them are very, very wide, like a villainous plot.
Oh, yeah.
And then others are like, what kind of candlestick holder is in a room, right? And so super detailed. And on one side, you're like, there's levels of resolution in random tables that are or are not useful. And I don't know exactly where they are. So, but I've been building these things that I called adventure generators, which were, built on the assumption that most people are playing their own adventures in their own campaign worlds. What can I offer them that still makes their job easier? Right. I mean, I've obsessed about the same thing forever, which is like, how do I make it easier for people to play D&D? Right. That's my big thing that I focus on. And so part of that is like, what kind of tools can I offer that make it easier for people to play D&D? Obviously, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master hits on stuff. The Lazy DM Workbook, which is the Kickstarter reward, the Kickstarter stretch goal for that, but also has sold really well. And that has a lot of tools in it. And I sort of want to, keep working with that. And I have found random tables to be so useful for breaking out of a rut.
Oh, yeah.
Or for kind of shaking up ideas. And I use them all the time. So, but trying to find the right place to do them. So like one of the ideas I had for the adventure generators are, I'll take like a movie like Jaws, and I'll break down the movie into big pieces. And then say like, if you were going to make an adventure based on the movie Jaws, like the adventurers have been hired by a local town in order to hunt down a powerful monster. There's like a few different variables in that story. What kind of monster is it? Who's protecting the monster? Where does the monster lair? Is there a twist, right? And then how do I do these like tables of ideas there so that you can pick it as one page adventure generator up, and you could go, I'd love to, I know what Jaws is. It'll resonate with my players because who doesn't love being hired to hunt down a big monster? And then I'll look at it and say, well, what big monster makes sense? And maybe in my campaign, I'll go, oh, well, it's Eberron. So this is going to be like a huge Warforged construct that's gone crazy, but I could base it on one of these monsters that are on here. So I made a bunch of those, like 10 of those for all different kinds of movie. Raiders of the Lost Ark and Jaws and Apocalypse Now and all these different stories. Seven Samurai is my favorite one, right? Like, hey, a bunch of bandits are attacking your town and the town has hired you in order to defend them from the bandits. And you're like, what's special about the town? Who are the bandits? Where do the bandits lair? What dark secret is the town hiding? So there's all these like interesting variables that you can sort of shake up to build totally unique adventures that are built around a theme. And it's funny because like I had players who were like, hey, this is like Seven Samurai. And I'm like,
good.
no. I'm like, well, it's still going to be unique. It's crazy goblins that are protecting a dragon egg from bugbears that are attacking, right? So, it's a lot of fun. So, but yeah, those kind of the intersection of those two questions, I think, is what I'm really spending a lot of time thinking about now, which is, where does randomness really help shake up a DM's approach to a game, and how does that make the DM's life easier and make it easier for them to run D&D games? And I'm trying to find the intersection of those 2 points. So we'll see where that goes. That and finishing up Fantastic Lairs, myself and Scott Fitzgerald. I can pitch it because it's not actually for sale yet, so it doesn't really help me to. And the Kickstarter's over and it's not for sale, so there's no advantage in pitching it right now. But it will be for sale. Myself and Scott Fitzgerald Gray, who's an editor for a longtime editor for Wizards of the Coast, freelance editor for Wizards of the Coast. He's the editors for the core books. And James Intercasso, who has written in many of the core books, now works for not Monty Cook, works for Matt Colville at MCDM.
Yep.
And the three of us got together last year, and we knew we wanted to work together on something, and we decided that what we wanted to do was boss battles. We wanted to write a whole book full of boss battles. So we wrote a book called Fantastic Lairs, which are 23 boss battles that you can drop into your D&D game, everything from first level to 20th level, with full color maps, full color art, and it was 130 playtesting groups. And so we finished the book, and now we're just getting it to print, and then we'll get it to people. But we're still finishing up the Kickstarter for that. There were a lot of rewards, and we're still spending a fair bit of time getting the rewards for that ready. So that's also what I'm obsessing about.
Yeah, you've like I said, you've been drawing a lot of traction. You're working with more and more people, and it's awesome that you get that experience of working with all these different people, because
I mean, Scott and I have worked together on probably 6 or 7 books at this point, and I just love the dude. Like, he's absolutely fantastic, and he's an absolute joy to work with, and he's a fantastic editor. Just love the guy.
Yeah, and speaking of working on other projects, Grendelroot is...
Yeah, Rune's the Grendelroot, yep.
Yeah, so Grendelroot is going to be on Shard Tabletop.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
So Hal from Shard Tabletop reached out to me a while back and said, hey, we're doing a new VTT. And I was like, oh, tell me about it. And so we spent about an hour on the phone. And he was interested in putting that together. And they did the heavy lift of converting it to their tabletop. So I said, how could I turn that down? Right. So Grendelroot, it's the first time that any of my stuff will have been built around any VTT. So it'll be an interesting experiment. We'll see how that works out. I'm excited to see it. Yeah.
I'm certainly hoping, and I'm more than willing to believe it's going to be epic.
Good.
That it's awesome that, you're going to be like a pioneer on this thing, which is dope.
That's the effect. Yeah, well, and with good company. I think Green Ronin is there. Trollord Games is there, and Kobo Press are both are there as well. And I think some other people too. So there's some definite big names. I think the approach of, hey, we'll convert it for you. It's a good way to get people on board.
Hey, just give us the text and we'll do the rest. Hey,
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Heck yeah. So, it's totally awesome that you get to be experiencing all this stuff, and you're putting out all this content. So speaking of putting out that content, go ahead and sell yourself. Go ahead and tell us what else you're working on, what else you got going on, and what you have to say.
Man, I suck at selling myself. I guess the one thing I'll sell is that I've recently rebuilt the Sly Flourish homepage to be more friendly to people who have never heard about anything that I've done before. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot going on that page. I tried hard to design it on if you get nothing else, here's 7 articles that are really good, right? And then if you want to know more, here are other areas. And if you want to see what the latest ones, here are the latest ones. And then here's a bunch of articles that I handpicked out of the 600 whatever articles that are on the site to that are tied to any particular topic. But I do have a problem that I am spread pretty wide. So, the YouTube people that found me on YouTube, and I've got a lot of people that have never heard about me anywhere else except on YouTube. Same with Twitch, same with my website, and luckily a lot of people that have picked up the book. So, I'm really just happy. I mean, I just want to make things that people are able to grab and enjoy, and that make it easier for them to get together with their friends and family and play D&D. I think it's important. The first article on the Sly Flourish website is called D&D Can Save Your Life.
Yeah.
And it's the article about how important it is for us to have a good reason. It's sad that we need one, but it's important that we have a good reason to get together with our friends and family. And I've talked to, I've had 3 different D&D groups, and all 3 we've all said, like, I don't know how we'd have gotten away with all this isolation if we weren't able to get together, even online, just to play some D&D once a week. And, where there's a lot of people who don't have that opportunity and don't have the friends to be able to get together with them. And, suicides are on the rise, and it's loneliness is deadly.
Oh, yeah.
Is really the thing. And this is one way to get people less lonely and to have a good reason to get together. It's sometimes it's weird to try to get together in a group, but it's not weird if you're all getting together to play D&D.
Absolutely.
Right. So having a good reason to do it, I think is really valuable and really important. And so I'm happy to do that. But yeah, the main thing is, like, if anybody wants to see my stuff, Sly Flourish is the best place to do it. And I just hope people will spend the, couple of minutes that it takes to digest that front page, because there's a lot going on. But I tried really hard to say, like, these, if you want to squeeze the most value out of me, a lot of which you could get for free, that page is the place to go do it. There's a lot of content there. There's thousands of hours of video. There's, hundreds of articles. There's free chat. All of my books have free chapters that aren't just marketing and PR. They're actual usable, playable stuff that you can get. All my adventure books have free, full color, fully edited, fully playtested adventures that you could just download and play. And if you want to buy the book, that's great. If you don't, and you got good joy out of the free stuff, that's great too. I'm happy. So yeah.
Yeah. So
you don't have to buy my books is the worst sales pitch ever, but that's not my main goal.
Once again, that's
right?
Humbling, because if you tell someone buy my book, then that's like,
you want to buy a book, that's great. And I try to make them cheap enough that you can buy them. But making the money is not my goal, right? My goal is help people get together with friends and family to play D&D. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, and I think that's something we're all striving for, because, pandemic or not, I think it is important to get together and have fun. It doesn't necessarily need to be role-playing games, but role-playing give you an awesome excuse.
It's a good excuse. Exactly, right. It really, I've thought about this. I think it really kind of clued into me like a year ago that, like, I was trying to think of all of the things that are really like high level goals that are important in my life. And it was like creativity and, being creative and relaxing and, being with my friends and my loved ones, and those are like the most important things to me. And I'm doing all of them when I play D&D.
Yeah.
That like we're relaxing together. I'm with my friends. I'm with my wife. We're playing D&D. We're acting like a bunch of 12-year-olds. And, there's nothing better than that. It's a great place to be. And it obviously is because of how popular it is. And it's been around a long time. So that means it'll probably be around a long time.
Yeah, here's looking for you once again. It can survive the nukes, right?
It can survive a nuclear war. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I for one welcome the zombie apocalypse, because I'll survive it, and then I get to play D&D with all the survivors. And
until they're like, I don't know, your rogue isn't really pulling their weight. I guess we're gonna have to eat you.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next from Wizards of the Coast, from the community, and from yourself. Of course, all the things I'm looking forward to are going to be absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to see your take on Rime of the Frost Maiden, because
I'm diving deep. I spent all day Saturday diving deep into that book. I've already read it, but I'm reading it again and really trying to tear this thing apart and rebuild it and figure out the campaign. And I've got big plans. My first session is tomorrow.
Heck yeah.
Tomorrow night's my first. Yeah, I've got 6 players, two new players that are starting, and we're it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I certainly think that your videos in particular are going to help out a lot of people picking up this book for the first time, seeing your approach to prep, because they may not follow exactly in your footsteps in regards of where they start or where they're going, but seeing the prep in mind is a big one. Because
I also waited 4 months so that I had lots of people to steal ideas from before I started running it myself.
See, that's where I messed up. I ran it the second it came out, and then I was the pioneer, but I led my thing straight into the freaking.
So what are your top 3 tips that you have for somebody just starting out with Rime of the Frost Maiden?
Top 3 tips are
big, small, whatever.
I would say, sandbox, it turns into a railroad because screw prepping all 10 towns at once. Screw that. 2, get all the NPCs introduced early, specifically the Arcane Brotherhood, because then, you can have some sort of semblance of the story. And 3, when that dragon comes running to town, consider what your players can do about it.
Yep.
Because written,
good thought.
there's not too much.
yeah. That fits well. Actually, I'm kind of hoping. So I have four potential group patrons, and one of them is Verlaine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm kind of hoping they pick her because it'll be really interesting if she's their group patron. And yeah, I did the same thing of like, how do you, not quite railroad it, but how do you take the sandbox and narrow it a little bit for those first quests? So I tried to like group them into sets of 3 quests where they can pick any 2 and sort of navigate their way. That's the approach that I'm going to take. And
mind you, when I say railroad, it's not like you're on a roller coaster. Railroad's like you can choose something more than B or C.
Here's 13 quests. Which one? By the way, you'll get killed by some of them, but where do you want to go? So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing all that. I'm looking forward to seeing what you put out next. And that is going to do it for this video. So thank you so very much for talking. This was a delight.
Yeah, and for me too.
I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next from everything. So if you got anything left to say.
No, I really appreciate being on. This has been great.
Alrighty. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. That was an absolute delight, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.